Hi, kids. It's time once again for one of your favorite activities here in geography class, a good old screencast. And perhaps I'm not with you today, but my voice is. This is Mr. Repsch. We're going to talk about the government family tree. Now, I'm sure that I or your other social studies teachers have given you some cardstock graphic organizers that we're going to use to put some information in about different types of government. And the one that we're going to start with is the oldest one, which is tribal rule. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint with you. You guys can fill in information as we go along. If there's something that you miss, remember this presentation will be made available for you through Canvas. So you can always go back and add to it later. Maybe at home tonight, maybe for homework even. Who knows? Homework, yes, that thing you do at home. All right, tribal rule, a political system where a small group of people make the decisions for the group. The people are not really elected, but rather chosen by the tribe because of their experience or value to the group. So if you think back to the video that we watched on the Natufians, those early hunter and gatherer groups that lived together, they would have had a system of government where the people that were most beneficial to the tribe were naturally in charge. All right, that could have been the best hunter, the wisest person, maybe a medicine man, maybe somebody that could fix your wounds or heal you if you got injured. Those people would have been the most respected, and in that system of government, they would have been the ones that people looked to as leaders. They were not really elected, but their skill set made them be in charge. This type of government actually experiences a lot of freedom for the people of the tribe. I mean, if you wanted to walk away from the tribe, you could walk away from the tribe. If you wanted to not go out on the hunt that day, you could not go out on the hunt that day. The problem with that, however, is if the hunt was successful, then you probably didn't get any of the food, and therefore you didn't eat. So the people in this system realized that survival meant they needed to work together for the common good of the group. So although they had a lot of freedom, they would have went along with the group because the group kept them alive. As I mentioned, the Natufians are a great example of this. They were hunters and gatherers, and then they transitioned to the first farmers. In these small groups, tribal rule would have worked really well for them. Now, as farming was invented, the introduction of farming allowed for human population to grow. We went over this when we watched the video. Mr. Crabtree did a great job of that. Nice job, Mr. Crabtree. With that, however, as populations grew, governments needed to change. They shifted away from meeting the basic needs of society and started focusing on protecting those large farms that were created and the crops that they produced. Now, that's going to create the need for different types of government. And as you guys were reading about the ancient civilizations, whether it was Egypt or Mesopotamia or Greece or Rome, you should realize that they all sort of came up with their own ideas of what that government might look like. From the ancient civilizations, these early groups, we established that there are basically 4 types of government that the ancient world had. There's the absolute monarchy, an aristocratic democracy, a theocracy, and a dictatorship. So now let's take a look at what those are. First, let's start with the absolute monarchy. It's a system of government where the leader has complete power over the people and the ability to make laws without consulting any other governing body. Now, this is the real key about a monarchy. This is why it's different from something like a dictator. The power is passed from parents to children or other relatives when the current leader dies. There are not really a lot of examples of truly absolute monarchies in the world today, but in the ancient world and then into another age called the Age of Monarchies, this was probably the most common form of government that existed, but it's kind of died out today. You might recall that as people learned to farm, they went from those small groups, and groups kind of started banding together, and populations grew, and we had the first city-states. If you read about Mesopotamia or if you read about Greece, you read about city-states. In the city-states, the absolute monarch was really the government of choice. Now, the first kings were born from victorious battles, and then they appointed their offspring to take over for them when they died. If you read about Greece and Mesopotamia, you know that the city-states often fought with each other. There was a lot of war that went on there. So kings that were victorious in battle They got to keep the power, they kept the people safe, and the people followed them and sort of followed their rules. In Mesopotamia, a good example of this was Hammurabi. And even though he's credited with writing laws and establishing rights for his citizens, he still held all the power. That's the thing about power and monarchs. Students always ask me, well, can't monarchs be like good monarchs and nice kings and queens, and can't they like let the people have lots of freedom? They can, but they're a little bit like your parents in that situation. They can allow you to have freedoms, they can also take it away. So if they can take those freedoms away, then they have absolute power, and the citizens do not. A democracy, political system where decisions are made by the citizens and majority rules. Now, an actual democracy like that, or something that we call a direct democracy, didn't really exist in the ancient world. What did exist was something called an aristocratic democracy. If you read the section on Greece, you know that that's where this sort of developed out of the dark ages of Greece. We had an aristocratic democracy. And in a society where you have an aristocratic democracy, the reason why it's not really a true democracy is because the only people that get to vote are usually men who were citizens and who owned land. They were the only ones that were really participating in government. If you read the section on Rome or Greece, you may have read about like 300 senators having the power to vote. And in that case, that's not really everybody, so it's not really a true democracy, but it's not one person like a king or a dictator making all the choices either. Now, dictatorship, a political system where the power is taken and held by one person, usually with the support of the military. So that's the difference between a dictator and a king. You can become a king simply because your dad was king and he died. A dictator needs to take that power, seize it, and usually they have the support of the military to help them do that. Great example of this from the section on Rome. If you read that section, you read about Julius Caesar. Caesar was a general in the army, and he was a very successful general, and he sent lots of riches back to Rome from all of the wars and battles that he fought and won. And that made the people of Rome really love him. So the Senate in Rome got sort of leery of his power, and they were worried that the people were too in love with him. So they called him home, basically to kill him. Caesar sort of figured out what was going on, though, and when he came home to Rome, he came with his army. So his army sort of supported him, and Caesar took over and became really the blueprint for the modern dictator. A theocracy, a political system where the laws and policies are based upon the majority religion, and in some cases, the leader of the country is also the leader of the religion. Now, if we think about Egypt, so in Egypt, the pharaohs, they were kings as well, or queens, and you might say, okay, well, so what's different about them as opposed to Mesopotamia? Well, in Egypt, the pharaohs also sold the idea to the people that they were descendants of the gods. So the Egyptian people believed that the pharaohs were more than human, that they were actually gods themselves. In that case, then they become something a little bit different, and we call that a theocracy. There are theocracies around today. If you think about Vatican City, Vatican City is its own country. Leader of Vatican City is the Pope. The Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. Therefore, it's a theocracy. There are other countries in the Middle East that follow Sharia, which is Muslim law. All of their laws are based upon Muslim beliefs. In that case, then we consider that to be a theocracy. So if you think about those four different groups that we read about, whether it be Greece or Rome or Mesopotamia or Egypt, they all had these different types of governments that developed a little bit differently in each area. That's as far as we're going to go right now with the graphic organizers that you have. As we start to move through history and get through this first part of the unit, Rome is actually going to fall, and that's going to create the Age of Monarchs. And we'll get into that and the Age of Revolution after Thanksgiving break. All right. Remember, guys, if you have questions about this, talk to your social studies teachers. You can also go back, watch this presentation, and fill in your graphic organizers. It is our goal that by the end of the unit, you can identify the 10 different types of government that we want you to learn, and these graphic organizers are your study guide to do that.